Yeah, so in this chapter, we're going to talk about the different kinds of girls there are and what are the best ways to engage with all these different kinds of girls. Because girls are not girls, okay? There's different kinds. Obviously, I'm massively overgeneralizing, oversimplifying, but I basically broke it down to two kinds of girls: high self-esteem, low self-esteem, and furthermore, high sex drive and low sex drive girls. But yeah, let's look into that. Now, you don't want to engage with this, you don't want to use the same way of engaging to every kind of girl, obviously. And to be fully honest, just biologically speaking, as we already established in chapters before, we're all just built to love sex. Sex is one of the most natural, if not the most natural things in the world, and we're just built to love it. However, society, or even in a more extreme manner, our upbringing can fuck us up pretty big time. You probably experienced that yourself. You don't have a perfect upbringing. None of us has. And that comes as that surfaces the best when it comes to sexuality. So what do I mean by that? So yeah, there are different kind of ways to engage with a girl depending on what kind of girl she is. For example, you can decide, okay, I only hang out with this girl in order to get social proof from her. I'm not even going to engage in any kind of sexual activity, just getting social proof from her. That is, I believe the old school pickup notion called it pivots or something. I believe that's what the young kids called it. And the other way, of course, is one-night stands. Okay, one-night stand and call it a day. You can become fuck buddies with a girl. You can get in a relationship with a girl, or you can just stay friends. The cool thing about staying friends, as a side note, is you can always be that. So even after her being your fuck buddy, you can decide you want to become friends with her and stuff like that. So the option for that is always open. But again, most importantly is for you to know what kind of girl is there and what is the best way to engage with her so you don't fall into traps, you don't end up in a manipulative relationship, you don't end up with the crazy girls, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about these examples in very, very thorough manner later. Most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, there's high self-esteem girls, low self-esteem girls, etc., etc. And here comes the harsh truth about game. You end up being attracted to those girls that reflect your own self-esteem the best. So if you've had a lot of experience already with a certain kind of girl, for example, I always end up with the crazy girls, the fucked up girls. I always end up with the crazy party girls. Or in my specific case, I always end up with the girls that had a really, really fucked up childhood. Tells a lot about me, funny enough. Now, granted, I didn't have a fucked up childhood myself, but what it was is I call this the fixer syndrome. So those girls that had the greatest impact on my life were always girls that had just like massive issues. And I kind of want to help them. I'm like, I feel attracted to this girl and I just want to fix her. I want her to be happy again. I want her to forget all the sorrow that she had. I want to help her. I want to fix her. And as I mentioned earlier, you attract those kinds of girls that you are yourself. And my problem was like, I so badly wanted somebody to fix me. I wanted to have somebody that shows me the world, that shows me how to become a man, that shows me how to go out and how to become an attractive man. That lack, because I never had somebody like that, was being mirrored in my choice of partner. Harsh truth. But yeah, so that's a good indicator of the girls that you're attracted to. And funny enough, a big reason why I've never had why I'm doing this right now, the natural and basically the whole job I'm having with Real Social Dynamics, is because I didn't have anybody to show me, so I want to kind of give that back. So it's kind of my fixer syndrome here as well, as funny as that sounds. And it's interesting to know that the more I got into game and personal development, the more I evolved as a person, as a man, the cooler and less fucked up the girls actually became I hung out with, all the way to an extent where now I just feel massively weirded out by those very, very fucked up childhood kind of girls. And I usually just like end up with the like pretty healthy girls mentally to a great extent. I'm still crazy, you know, I'm a nerd. So I kind of end up with the nerdy girls as well, just as a side note. So you can see yourself very well in your choice of partners. But let's get into it. Low self-esteem girls. Now there's a couple ways to identify low self-esteem girls. We're going to go through them, not in any particular order, but if you see one or many of those aspects, you can be pretty sure that it is a low self-esteem girl you're dealing with here. Number one, manipulation. They're highly manipulative, mostly use their sexuality, their looks, to manipulate people into giving them what they want. And the interesting thing is the reason why they manipulate is not because they're evil or because they're Satan or whatever the fuck. The reason why they manipulate people is because their reality consists of such a bad self-picture, self-image, like, oh my god, I'm such a horrible person, I hate myself deep down inside, I don't respect myself deep down inside, that they think every other person must think the same. So they literally think like, okay, people could never like me for who I am. I mean, look at me, I'm horrible. I don't even like myself. So the only way to engage with people, the only way to reach out to people is through me manipulating them. Because I, as a low self-esteem person, just don't believe that anybody could just like me. Obviously, they're not like me, they just want to fuck with me. So I need to manipulate them so they stay with me. Very bad. And I have to say, it's not just girls, these are like low self-esteem person in general. Another important character trait is they're aggressive or passive aggressive. Like, usually girls are very passive aggressive, you know, they start walking around like not talking to him anymore, like, oh, you know what's wrong already. And you're like, what? No, I don't know what's wrong. Oh, you know. Like, that's passive aggressive behavior. Or aggressive behavior, okay? Like girls like trying to run in your door and shit like that. I had one girl, she like threatened that she would walk around in my house, knocking on every neighbor's door, and telling them how bad of a person I am. So that is aggressive behavior. And another feature is drama. What is drama? It is emotions. They need the drama. They need the drama of the everyday life because that's feeding them with the emotions that they need. They're addicted to emotions. If they don't get the drama from real life, they start watching soap operas. They start watching, the Jersey Shore or whatever the fuck, all these talk shows because that's, whoa, there's something going on. I need the emotions, which leads further, it feeds into the notion of a relationship with that girl that a well-functioning harmony relationship does not work with them. It's funny, maybe you've had an experience like that, like all of a sudden finally everything works out, you're both happy, everything is cool, and then the girl starts a fight for no reason. That's not necessarily because the actual thing she starts a fight about is pissing her off. No, it's more like she needs the friction, she needs the emotion. Again, a well-functioning, nice relationship is not going to work with her. So what they usually do, not usually, but what I see so many times is low self-esteem girl, or LSE girl, as we call it, finds a nice little beta male because he gives her the validation, he provides her with the emotions and, whatever else she wants. And he, of course, tries to make her life happy and gives her everything she wants until everything's perfect. And then all of a sudden, she loses interest. She, I quote, doesn't feel it anymore. Now, of course, then she goes out, fucks some alpha male stud, right? The douchebag, how the the mainstream narrative would call it, and then she blames the beta male. Oh, I just don't feel it anymore. You're just not a real man anymore and stuff like that because she needed the friction, she needed the drama. Another feature is they test you a lot. We call this shit test. We're going to talk about this later. And the opposite, because every girl is going to test you because the basic test is, hey, are you an alpha male? Are you cool? But the way low self-esteem girls test you is their tests have no boundaries. A perfect example of that, it was actually in my hometown in Austria. I met a girl, beautiful, angel face, absolutely gorgeous. She has that angel face, you couldn't imagine her having any bad thoughts because she has such a beautiful angel face. We're going to talk about this in a second. And I met her, and it was New Year's Eve. I had those like little firecrackers, and we threw it around the parking lot of the disco, and we had a good time. And she's like, you know what, Max? You should take the firecracker and go inside on the dance floor and just throw it at people. Throw it in the middle of the dance floor. And I'm like, whoa, no. Like people could get hurt from that. Like you can't throw those inside. Are you crazy? Those were like hardcore firecrackers. They were like really loud, And she's like, oh, are you not a real man? Huh? Are you not a real alpha male? No, you should do that. Come on, don't be a fucking pussy. And again, like, that's crazy. And I remember I had the pickup theory back then already in my head. I'm like, okay, whoa, that's crazy. So her shit tests have no boundaries. No boundaries at all. So that is one, another feature that a low self-esteem girl might throw at you. Important to know here is that it's the majority of girls that are low self-esteem. Now, why is that? Because usually attractive girls are younger, and yeah, younger girls just have low self-esteem. You're pretty much the same. You have, if you're in the mid-20s, you probably have a lot more self-esteem now than you had when you were 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So, it just takes a while for your character to grow, to evolve, for you to become, a more esteemed, how do you say, a self-confident person. So usually all the younger girls, and the majority of the girls that you'll be hanging out with in your pickup journey, are going to be low self-esteem, but not all of them. Don't worry, okay? No red pill thing. Like, they're all low self-esteem and manipulative. No, don't worry. We'll go to the good side of girls later on. I said it earlier already, hot girls very often have low self-esteem. Again, that goes together with their young age, but also there's this notion called the halo effect. What does the halo effect say? It is that when we see a pretty person, man or woman, we kind of automatically project a perfect lifestyle, perfect character traits on them. Like I said earlier, beautiful girl, angel face, she looks so cute and innocent, and you just kind of start interpreting everything she does, like, oh, she's cute and innocent. So you kind of, you just think that person is perfect, she has perfect character, etc., etc. When in reality, they don't necessarily have that. They're not necessarily a good person just because they look very pretty. So be careful with that. A pretty face doesn't mean a pretty character. Also, they behave differently to all kinds of people. You might have seen that yourself, You hang out with a girl and she's hanging out with one of her girlfriends and she's all nice to the girlfriend. Girlfriend leaves for a second. Oh my God. And all of a sudden, here comes the shit talk. Like, oh my God, I can't believe that. So she shit talks people behind their back. Important to know here, if you think you're the only person she doesn't shit talk, you're wrong. She probably is going to talk shit talk about you as well. Again, that all feeds into, because she's deep down inside, she's actually very low self-esteem. So she puts on a mask, she's overly nice to people, etc., etc., etc. Victim role, victim mentality, right? Also very prevalent. The girls complain, like, oh, I have it so difficult. I always end up with the wrong guys. Victim, victim, victim. Poor me, poor me, poor me. A high self-esteem girl will be somebody who steps up, right? They could be through as much shit, if not even more shit, but they're like, okay, fucked up situation, fucked up upbringing, but I'm going to do the best out of it. Low self-esteem girls don't do that. They love the emotion of being the victim, right? And they subconsciously get themselves in a situation where they're the victim over and over again. They say girls who are beat by their boyfriends usually end up with another boyfriend that is ending up beating her. So they always find back into that role. There's extremely deep psychological aspects playing into here. We're not going to do that deep into that because it doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with that. All you need to know is how to identify those low self-esteem girls. I always also say, look at her relationships. Look at her friendships and her relationships to her family and the close friends. How tight are they? How good is the relationship between them? Okay, how solid are her relationships? If she can feel like she trusts her family, her friends, etc., that is usually a high self-esteem girl. But again, if she puts on a false mask here, she behaves completely different there. If she has not a lot of solid relationships with their parents, with her brothers, sisters, whatever, and then it's usually a low self-esteem girl. So usually the way she has a relationship is usually a very good indicator whether or not she's low self-esteem or high self-esteem. Drug abuse, alcohol abuse, I think that's very obvious. Many of those hardcore party girls usually have low self-esteem. They go out party, they just get completely gone with alcohol, drug influence, etc., etc. Basically a form of escapism. I believe that's what you call it. And they also love the validation. We're going to talk about that in a second, and so on and so forth. Now, beware that girls go through phases, and just because she's low self-esteem when she's 19, 21, 25 doesn't mean she's going to be low self-esteem forever. People can change. People can evolve. And I had that many times where I meet a girl, she's very high self-esteem. She got her shit together and stuff like that. And then she would tell me about, her wild teenage years when they were 16, going to underage drinking parties, etc. Oh yeah, that was my party phase. I was very insecure because of this, because of that. So again, most of that is temporary. But again, it's important for you to know in that situation where you meet the girl, is she low self-esteem or high self-esteem? Also, they love validation. They're so validation seeking. They're fishing for compliments. If you look at girls, low self-esteem girls, Facebook, Instagram accounts, together, social media, they're usually full of pretty faces, duck faces, of very, very sexually alluring pictures, because that's where they get the likes. That's where they get all the comments. Oh my God, you're so pretty, so pretty. Funny though, on the other hand, they adhere to the 100% mainstream social narrative notion of sex, which means judging, slut shaming, etc. So if you see that a lot of extremely pretty girl calling other pretty girls are like, oh, she's a slut, she's a whore, she's dirty, and all that shit. Again, very, very low self-esteem. So it's interesting, and using their sexuality to get validation, in order to feel themselves, to make themselves feel good. That's my identity. I'm so full of shit. I hate myself, but at least I get good likes on my Facebook. Well, on the other hand, just totally judging, looking down on people who have an open sexuality, etc., etc. So again, discrepancy, very, very bad. Low self-esteem girl. You don't want to indulge in any of that. Another one is beta male shaming, for example, right? Oh, look at that guy. He's so gay. Like, he totally wants to fuck me, but he's such a fucking loser. Okay, like, putting people down, basically, is just a bad thing. Low self-esteem girls love putting people down. Beta male shaming, slut shaming, the whole fucking thing. And it's funny because she qualifies herself so easily. Once you take the validation just a little bit away from them, once you're the only guy who doesn't give her compliments that she's so pretty, things like, small things like, Julian said that a lot, like, oh, a little too red, a little too short, and boom, oh my god, those girls will chase you forever. Which is, great for one night stand, great for becoming fuck buddies, etc., but you don't want to engage in any longer relationship with those kind of girls. But we're talking about this in a second. I'm going to do fast here. So again, they validate themselves really, really fucking quickly. Let's see, for example, in this little infield clip here. I'm just a guy with a drink on his head. You guys are so much fun.
I have like some more friends. That one too.
No, not you, her. Her mainly, yeah.
Yeah, I think you found a girl.
So validating, like that's what, that's one of the girls, like you can tell. So as you can basically see here, she's standing there with another friend. She's extremely good looking, by the way. Again, low self-esteem girls can be very, very good looking. And I'm saying, oh, you guys are funny. And she's like, oh, thank you, right? She got the validation. And then I say, except for you. And oh my God, all of a sudden, lack of validation. She needs it, she needs it, she needs it. I furthermore ignore her, tell my friends to ignore her, and again, she's more and more validation, more like, oh, where are you from, where are you from? Let's see. Like, all I would do is just get validation away from her. Yeah, you see what I mean? Like, it's just pure validation chasing, like, it's crazy.
I shared my drink with you.
You see it? It's cool, you don't need to qualify yourself.
I shared my drink with her, but I didn't have to play again with her. Okay.
You see, like, if all of us ignore her, she's just like, yeah, but if it's too much. Well, yeah, I mean, if I call her out, obviously she's like, fuck you. But she's still looking at me, though. I see it. You see it?
Where are you from?
Isn't that interesting?
Where are you from?
All of a sudden, she wants to know where we're doing. I'm from Austria.
Austin?
Austria.
Really?
Do you know where that is?
Yes.
Yeah. Also, by the way, note the seeking for opportunity.
And I'm going to Spain.
Seeking for opportunity.
Next summer.
Let's
I'm
go.
going to Spain.
Are you trying to bounce your boobies in my face? That's not how it works. Here's going to be the funny thing. I'm going to be nice to her. I'm going to hug her, and let's see what she's going to say now.
No, I didn't mean it like that, okay? Okay.
Hug me like a real person, not a dog.
I have a
Not a dog.
boyfriend.
Yeah, you see? I have a boyfriend, right? So all of a sudden, she has the validation that she needed, pushing the guy away. She doesn't want anything. Like, oh my God, I got the validation. No, 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 thank you, right? So that way she can remain on her little self-imposed pedestal while simultaneously feeling very empty inside. The most obvious signal that a girl can give you that she's low self-esteem, usually coupled with low sex drive as well, we're going to talk more about low sex drive, high sex drive later on, is when she gives you what I call dichotomous signals. Now, those dichotomous signals, the basic principle behind those is, on the one hand, they signal you something like, oh my God, I'm so horny, please fuck me, you're so fucking hot, I really need it badly, come on, let's fuck. But once you quote unquote make a move, or you want to meet her, she's like, oh no, I can't. She comes up with some bizarre, like those, usually the more bizarre those reasons, the more low self-esteem, the more fucked up they are. She comes up with some bizarre excuse as to why this is not possible. So let's get into a couple of examples here. The first example, if you have the natural version that includes the max hot seat, we're going to go into an entire clip with what I call the devil. It's a girl that gives me those dichotomous signals over and over again. You see me how to deal with it and succeed, by the way. And or it's very prevalent over text game. You might notice that, like, those typical, like, 3 a.m. text games. The girl calls you at 3 a.m. like, hey, come over, I need you, blah, blah, blah. And then you want to come over, and all of a sudden she's like, oh, well, I fell asleep. Let's look into a couple of text game examples here that people from the Natural Family have sent me, and let's look into them. So yeah, here, trusted member of the Natural Family, I quote, and I think his English is not perfect, so excuse me. Hi, Max. I'm having trouble initiating a meetup with this girl. I met her in a club. I got her number. She tried to kiss me as I walked away. We have the first I caught him a signal. I thought, great, I'll meet this girl, no problem. I texted her. We became Facebook friends. I then found out she was a model with thousands of followers. Everyone knows her. She's extremely popular, right? Here we have the social media. She's getting all the validation from social media. I'm not saying every model has those problems, but it's already getting into that indicator. She's extremely popular. Probably got hundreds of guys sending her loads of messages, massaging her ego, giving her all the power, making her feel like the super prize, which is everyone is dying to win. You can even see how insecure the guy is a little bit here because his ego comes up with that as well. And which is everyone is dying to win. During our text conversation, she kept fishing for compliments, another sign, sending me loads of pictures of her, another sign, none of which I let on that I really liked her. So he's kind of doing well here. He shows alpha male behavior. I teased her for being too old, teased her for looking ill. She asked what color of hair I liked. I told her just to keep a hat on, or even better, some other fucking thing. I dropped hints that I'm used to being around other models. I told her that I've only been with 2 models who actually had a personality. So he does not that badly. He might overcompensate a little bit, but the basic gist is he wants to show alpha male behavior, which led to her qualifying herself. So here you can see he takes away the validation. She qualifies herself even more. I even teased her about how she is a bad kisser, blah, 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 blah. Telling her the only reason I remember her was because her kiss was the worst kiss of the night. That's a little overcompensating from the guy's side. When I asked her to meet, she ignored the request and sent another picture asking if I liked it. Interesting. Now, I don't know, should I ask her again, yes or no, yada, yada, yada. So you basically see her fishing for compliments. Hey, let's meet. Completely ignores it, sends him more pictures fishing for compliments. Very bad. Now, the next example is actually even worse. I apologize in advance. So here's a trusted Natural Family member here, and I quote, I just got the rug pulled out from beneath my 2 feet, turning my reality upside down by a bitch. Now, he says that, not his words, not mine. So good. It's such a good example. It's so frequently that this happens. She calls me at 1 a.m. and talks to me all sexy and tells me how she's all alone at her place and she wants to watch a movie with me. So she asks if I want to come over, and I say, sure, send me your address and I'll be there in an hour. She sends me her address. I get to her place about 45 minutes away and text her to come down. We go back a few more threads, and then she stops responding. Like she disappeared or some shit. And I'm still sitting at that fancy lobby of a downtown blah 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 city complex for students, writing this to make sense of the stupidity I just underwent. This was from a cold approach I did last week, and we made plans to see each other, but I stood her up on by accident. She called me tonight and escalated to the meetup. What the fuck, dudes? What the fuck? So again, basic example. I'm so horny. Please fuck me. I need it. Signal number 1. And then all of a sudden, oh, I'm tired. I need to go to sleep. Or you can't come. Or she just stops responding, which is the other signal. So that is very, very prevalent with low self-esteem girls, especially with the low self-esteem, low sex drive girls. But before we're going to get into more examples, here's the bright side. Don't worry too much, because low self-esteem girls can still have a high sex drive. So those are the girls that are very validation seeking, but they still love sex. They still want to be fucked. They even see sex as a form of validation. Here's the deal. If you counter their manipulation attempts, their bullshit, their validation seeking with alpha male behavior, which basically means not taking any of their shit, not qualifying yourself, not taking them too seriously, basically same behavior as you would do anyway if you're an alpha male, you can get to sex pretty easily. You can engage with sex with a girl, and many times those girls are also, quote unquote good in bed. They're quite crazy and so on and so forth. They can be quite slutty, right? Once you're in bed with them, they embrace their whore side, as we talked about earlier in the Madonna whore complex, and that can be pretty good. But, and here's the most important thing, Only engage with them in terms of one-night stands. Maximum fuck buddies. Maximum fuck buddies. Because again, sex is great. They can be cool. They can be fun too. Definitely. They can be party girls, everything. They can give really good sex and so on and so forth. But you do not want to get them in your life because they can fuck you up very, very big time. So meet up with them, have sex, have fun, do whatever. But don't let them too far into your life. Don't share too much with them because eventually it's just going to go down the fucking drain and we're going to see more very bad examples as well. Now, low self-esteem, low sex drive is the worst and most horrible version of a girl you can encounter. So basically what happened there is they have low self-esteem and something happened in their childhood that just made them not being able to identify with sexuality. So their whole identity around sex is just completely fucked up. These are usually girls that have been raped, abused, molested. They just they can't identify with their sexual side. So many times it happens like this girl in that example. They're all horny and they act all horny, but they don't even really know what really horny means. They're just I think I need the thing, and then they crave the validation. And they love the validation from the guys, obviously, because it temporarily fills the void inside them. And once it comes to real sex, or once they're about to meet, all of a sudden they come up with a bizarre reason. It just never happens. Okay, if you've ever had that a girl kind of, puts you off, she's like, oh, hey, let's meet, and she never does it, and she always keeps you on a tight leash, if you will. And you never ever get to meet her or escalate further, or even if you escalate and you even end up having sex that's just horrible, total starfish. Those are low self-esteem, low sex drive girls. So there is some point of their growing up, of their upbringing, there has been this discrepancy between their sexual identity, completely fucked up. Here's what you're gonna do: run, run. Don't hang out with those girls. Don't get manipulated by them. It's horrible. It ends up in bullshit. We're gonna have more examples. Run. Okay, low self-esteem, high sex drive, totally cool. You can hang out with them, you can have sex with them, you can even get social proof from them, use them as pivots, if you will, even though I don't like that description. But low self-esteem, low sex drive girls, get the fuck out of there. Get the fuck out of there. There's just nothing I can say about that. So yeah, let's look at an actual real-life example that one of the natural family members has gone through. And I quote, "Before the game, one of the reasons I got into the game is I had one-itis. And she actually once told me that if I don't blow off basketball game with my friends, she would break up with me. I was a chode as hell to bite her, and I came and she wasn't there. So she says, don't go to the basketball game or I break up with her. So he said, okay, baby, I just want to make things right. I'm not going to go to the basketball game. I'm just going to meet you, and she's not there. I never even fucked her. She would make me, she would, again, sorry for the bad English, she would make me deal with school teachers for her. I went to the market for her, and I never really even fucked her. Luckily, my friend ended the relationship for me. Thank you, bro, lol. Anyway, I was so trapped in a mindset that she will leave me and embarrass me. Sorry you had to read this." So again, it just never happens. They never have sex. They use you. They abuse you. This usually goes along with beta males, right? They choose beta males subconsciously or consciously because an alpha male will never deal with their shit. So let's look at more examples here of low self-esteem behavior. And I really want to say here, this is not because I want to judge women look how stupid they are. As I want to give you a clear picture of what a low self-esteem woman looks like, so you can avoid it or at least identify her and then make a conscious decision of how far you want that woman in your life. And again, overgeneralizing, and we're going to the bright side, to the high self-esteem woman very, very shortly. But let's go through a couple more examples in order to get a little bit of a greater picture on that. Trusted member of the natural family. I met this really alluring girl and started seeing her for only 2 weeks. I didn't realize she manipulated me until contemplating about it, but she came to me one night and started crying. I asked her, "Why are you crying, babe?" She told me, "You don't even care about me. You do the same shit to all the other sluts in the bar." Right here we have the sexual judging. Oh, all the other girls are sluts. I felt so bad. This is what he says. I felt so bad that I stopped what I was doing and spent the whole night with her. Eventually, she convinced me to stop going out every weekend. I almost felt obligated to be with her and that having fun and meeting girls and new people was wrong. In the end, it didn't work out. Well, no shit. The end didn't work out. I feel like she just used me to see if she could get a guy like me to commit her to her, almost as a test. The only lesson I learned was never change yourself for someone else. Another example here. My ex was one of these manipulative girls, and also one of the reasons why I resonated so much with Game and when I heard about it. It explained so much about our relationship and why the shit happened the way it did. She made me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with other people. She made me feel guilty for going out, etc. So then when I became the boring provider figure who had completely lost all his social skills and his friends, I was now boring, and she left me. Then, when she realizes, after she left him, he built his life up again. When she realized I'm happier without her, she begs to have me back. She was, and probably still is, the best example of manipulative psychopath, and the best part is it doesn't look like she even had any idea what she was doing most of the time, even in hindsight. True psychopathic behavior. So this is what I said earlier. Again, don't hate girls because of that. They've had it rough. Their identity is just completely fucked up. It's not like they're evil. They just don't even know what's going on. They're completely subject to emotions. Logical thinking doesn't really work that well. Just very, very sad. Very, very sad. Again, just for you to know. Another example, she would flirt with my wing and my own brother and barely interact with me unless using her sexuality to keep me hooked. I felt like she had me on a string, but I didn't recognize it till after I cut her off. We're stupid too. We men are so blinded by a pretty face and a hot ass and a nice pair of tits. Because although guys say basically the same, like, I didn't realize what was going on until I stopped. Okay? Until my friends told me to stop. Because again, halo effect. Pretty girl, beautiful girl, and we just get sucked in, like, oh, she's so amazing and stuff like that. Yeah. Fucked up. And again, I want to say there's guys that do exactly the same. Alright? It's not judging women here. It's just low self-esteem people. But since it's about talking to girls here, we might as well give you all the examples about girls. Another guy, I was dating this girl, actually just fucking her, and she wanted more. And she always felt like she didn't deserve me, and I could feel it. Whenever I would make something she didn't like, she would try to make me feel bad about it. She was complaining about me not eating her. I suppose he's talking about cunnilingus. She would try to analyze me to make me feel like shit. But I didn't get trapped, though. I knew what she was up to, and she remained my little bitch like I wanted to. Yeah, it's an extreme example of a girl I wouldn't tell you to make her your bitch. But again, she tries to make you feel bad, etc. This guy here. I went out with one of my friends. She was an ex-coworker of mine. She recently broke up with her boyfriend, so I was hanging out with her as friends. She had very low self-esteem being alone. Then we both liked each other. I finally escalated and got to a point where we made out with each other once. After that kiss, she would not allow any further escalation, thinking it would mean that we were together. So again, bizarre excuse why we could not make out with each other. She loved having me around, but did not want us to be a thing. I was totally manipulated without knowing it because I thought I could never fall into that trap, so I stayed with her for a month and a half. After that phase, I saw her again 2 months later and realized she got more confident, which she credits for me hanging out with her. She told me, I can have every guy except my ex. She started hanging out with guys that she knew liked her. It seemed like she wanted to go on dates with guys just to flirt with them and get free stuff without having sex or a boyfriend. So again, low self-esteem, low sex drive behavior here, just getting free shit, never actually having sex because there's a strong disassociation with her sexuality. She told me if you were me and you would go out with guys for free, wine and chocolate, you would do the same. She would sometimes call me to talk about guys she met or how she missed her ex. It was always a sad story. I told her I didn't want to talk to her if it was negative, and now she does not call or message me anymore. So again, he was basically like this emotional tampon, as you call it, which is a very, very frequent thing they do with beta males, like, oh, dropping all my bullshit on them. Another guy says, simple example of me being a provider back when I didn't know better. A few years back, I just wanted to have a few female friends for social proof, but mostly just for a good time. Didn't care about fucking them, they were more like little sisters, but they started using me for lifts and such. Whenever I said no, they went, well, that's not nice, be considerate. So it's so interesting, and then he furthermore says, the positive reinforcements were like, you're the nicest and such, and I hated it, blah, 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 blah. it's interesting because, again, here's the mainstream kind of thing, the mainstream thinking, like, oh, you little fucking beta male, I would never fuck you, but I'm going to get free shit from you. And if you refuse, I'm going to call you out. I'm going to beta male shame you. Oh, that's not nice. Why are you not a nice guy? Bad. Here's another example. I hope we're stopping with these soon. I got a great one about this. A few years back, my very first girlfriend broke up with me a few months before my high school graduation. I was fortunate enough to attend a very prestigious high school back in my home city, so our graduation ceremony was quite a big deal among students. Of course, tickets were limited and very sought after. Apparently, my ex-girlfriend was unable to get one before they ran out. So, on the very same morning of the graduation ceremony, while I was receiving my diploma, a friend of hers texted me saying that my ex-girlfriend really missed me and that she had realized breaking up with me was a mistake and she wanted to talk to me that day, that it was urgent and couldn't wait. Foolish me fell for the trap my ex and her friend planned. I found her a ticket at the last minute so she could come to the party that night and we could talk. She surely attended, saw me a few times, didn't even come to say hello or congratulations or anything. She simply used me to get a ticket into this popular prom night and then went on to spend the whole night with some of the other people she knew from my class. She did apologize about a year later when I guess she had a consciousness check. Again, here, people can evolve, people can grow, people can get out of that low self-esteem phase. She told me she really wanted to attend that party, and manipulating me into getting her a ticket was the only way she thought she could do it. Another example, many years back when I was still in school and full of chauderade, a girl and I mutually liked each other. That's what I thought at the time. After we kissed for the first time, she told me, if you really like me, you don't talk to me for the next month, so I will know for sure that you actually like me or it's over. Like, again, what the fuck? I thought she was joking at that time, so I didn't think much of it. And then for the following months, she proceeded to purposely drag other guys near my proximity and flirt with them in front of me to make me feel jealous. She would actually make sure I see it, like sitting on their lap, feeling them up, etc., cringing at myself as I think back. Lol. So again, sexually alluring, validation, jealousy, drama, emotions, yada, yada, yada. Another example, I was with the same girl of my first from age from 15 through 27. She would rarely put out, whatever that means. I tried everything I could think of and even asked her, and she would just say, oh, maybe I'm too stressed. If you did more around the house, maybe I'll be more interested. So it seems like the girl is withdrawing sex from him, using it as a manipulation bait, so because he should do more around the house, and he says, and I would do more and still little to no change. It got to the point where I was doing almost everything. At the time, I was working nights and found out long after the relationship ended that she was having parties late night when the kids were asleep and I was at work. No wonder she was burnt out. And I guess I stuck around for moral duty. I had kids to raise, and I did commit when we were married. I was also afraid of financial problems if we got separated, and I was also afraid that I wouldn't be able to find someone else. Losing her was the best thing I ever did, and it's funny too, because all the things I was afraid of were all fucking lies. So what this guy did is, he didn't adhere to the natural rules. He actually let a low self-esteem girl, possibly low sex drive, into his life, married her, and even got kids with her. Worst mistake ever. This is actually a really good example, and let's make this the last one. I was young and naive, but I loved the girl so much she was able to scam me hard out of thousands of dollars and gallons of tears. I was taking a break from college, and she came into my life and offered me all sorts of insights into counterculture, reading, Bakunin, Ayn Rand, Tolstoy, etc. Smart girl, totally smart girl. She reads all these things. We traveled the world together on my dime. That's right. She would say over and over that she loved me, but that she needed to generate income and travel, so I made it happen. I paid for her trips and gave her a wage in order to have her company. Granted, we had lots of sex in the beginning, and it was spectacular, but after a couple of years, she started wanting to see other people despite our arrangement, and I was so infatuated that somehow I wound up living with her and her new boyfriend in his father's house and in the middle of some bumfuck fucking place. She deliberately stopped... Oh God. She deliberately stopped the sex, and I literally spent nights crying myself to sleep while she spent nights in his room while I slept alone every other day. Somehow I got myself out of that situation with a couple of slaps to my face from caring friends who heard my plight. I caught her trying implanting suggestions in my head when I slept. I think that was one of the last straws. I spent a lot of time recovering from that. In short, this girl blew my mind with fresh philosophy and showed me some new things in bed and was able to convince me to run away and spend loads of money on her. When she had what she needed, she didn't just leave me. She asked me to continue to supply her while she began a relationship with a new guy while living with them. She took aggressive advantage of my naivety and blind love. She wasn't all evil and offered me a lot, but there were clear signs of manipulation. She was clearly disturbed. Ever since, over a decade, I've never fallen that hard for anyone again. So again, it could be smart girls, usually very pretty girls. And I want to say, because they have such low self-esteem, that is the only way they think they can engage with people. It's not because they're evil from the bone. It's just they don't know any better. For you, it's important to know to avoid those girls. You can have sex with them. They're usually good in bed, as some of those people said. But don't get them in your life. Don't let them get too close. Drama doesn't interest the high self-esteem girl. Of course, to a certain extent, we all kind of respond to drama and the emotions evoked from them, but it's not something she does have to have. A well-functioning relationship, perfect. She's happy ever after with a well-functioning, long-term relationship. She's not manipulative. If she's manipulative in a way that benefits her and the person that she manipulates, right? So, for example, she knows her partner has been letting himself go a lot and he's getting unhealthy. She maybe manipulates him a little bit, like teases his ego a little bit so he goes to the gym together with her, right? So he lives healthy again. So again, her manipulation is always very, very positive manipulation. She's just a good fucking influence on you. The relationships they have are very, very solid. You have a good relationship to her family, to her friends. She cares about her friends. She's there for them. She helps them out. She loves them. She's very motherly. I've had that many times whenever I was with a high self-esteem girl and I had headache, migraine. The girl's like, oh my God, can I help you? Let me do this for you. Let me do that for you. And the most important point here is she treats you well if you treat her well. And she doesn't treat you well if you don't treat her well. She's leaving when you treat her not so well. Because look at that. What does a low self-esteem girl do? You treat her well. You give her the validation. She treats you like shit. You treat her like shit. You turn the validation away from her. Now she chases you and she treats you like a god. Total discrepancy here. High self-esteem girl doesn't do that. You treat her like shit, she leaves. She's gone. She finds another high self-esteem guy. You treat her well, she's going to treat you well back. Everything is going to be fine. Now, important to know here is they still test. They still shit test. Well, the basic premise of a test is like, hey, are you an alpha male? Now, of course, a high self-esteem girl wants to make sure that you're an alpha male as well. And, there can still be confrontational character traits, but those tests are never beyond boundaries. They're never meant for you to hurt yourself or hurt others, but they're still tests. For example, let's look into this infield footage here.
Excuse me. I hate to interrupt. I don't want to be a dick.
I hate to interrupt, and her response is, then why do you do it? Right? It's not her being low self-esteem, she wants to manipulate me. She's just like, okay, guy coming up to us. Let's see if he's a fucking alpha male.
I couldn't resist.
And I'm like, oh, I couldn't resist, right? Make it fun. And she's just very confrontational in the beginning here. Let's see a couple other things.
What were you talking about? You were so into it. You were like,
Yeah, we were
Sounds
talking
like-
about
Did you talk about
daddy
Schedbuller?
issues.
Did you talk about Schedbuller?
No, we were talking
And then I
about
went to IKEA. I had best Schedbuller.
shit. No,
Daddy issues. I'm sorry.
daddy issues.
You got me. With that, you got me. I love girls with daddy issues.
Shit. No.
What if I? No.
Shit. No.
What if I came up?
Advice: if you want to get laid, don't say that out loud.
I'm a virgin.
Yeah, basic premise. I get that test a lot. If you want to get laid on advice, don't say things like that. Or like, oh really? Like, sorry, she's just very confrontational. Doesn't mean that she's manipulating me. She just wants to see, okay, is this guy a high self-esteem guy or no? By the way, a good response here.
Don't say that out loud.
I'm a virgin.
I'm a virgin, right? Don't qualify yourself like, oh, actually, I fuck a lot of girls. No, just don't qualify yourself, disqualify yourself much rather. And again, if she, in her character trait, is in and of itself very confrontational, doesn't mean she's low self-esteem. She just wants to see. But we're talking more about all these tests later on. Still, one of the best ways to identify whether or not she's high self-esteem or low self-esteem is look at the way the girl reacts to a compliment. Again, it's about validation here. If you compliment her and she treats you like shit, low self-esteem. If you compliment her and she like tries to overcompensate, like, yeah, I know, I'm very pretty, I'm the best, oh my god, also low self-esteem. Here's the basic gist. A high self-esteem girl takes the compliment well. She says thank you, and that's it. It's not a big deal. It doesn't necessarily make her day. She is aware of her worth, and if you give her a compliment, she's just like, okay, yeah, that's cool, thanks, you're cute, thank you. So anyway, it's just not a big deal for her. I remember I was actually myself in a relationship with a very, very low self-esteem girl. She had the whole program, you know, fucked up childhood, yada, 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 extremely beautiful, and I fell for that trap myself. Not saying that was a bad time. I had a great time with her, and I learned a lot, and I'm happy that it happened. But yeah, you know, she was very manipulative, and she couldn't take a compliment. I remember one of the first compliments I gave her, we actually had sex a long time, for a week or two straight, and I never complimented her looks. Because I kind of felt like I don't want to give that validation. But one day I just looked at her and I'm like, you know, I really never said that, but you're just absolutely beautiful. Like, you're one of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen. And she was so weirded out by that. She's like, you could see like she couldn't process that compliment. The way she reacted was not just like, oh, thank you. She was just totally like, yeah, of course I know, I'm fucking awesome. Like, just total overcompensation. Totally weird. You could see, again, a low self-esteem girl can't take a compliment that well. In general, you could say that the older the age of the girl, the higher the chance there is that she's high self-esteem. We talked about this earlier, right? Her identity is being formed. She knows her worth, and stuff, et cetera, et cetera. She's also gone through experiences that made her character grow. So usually older girls are usually higher self-esteem. Again, massively oversimplifying, massively overgeneralizing here, but that is the basic gist. And low sex drive girls coupled with high self-esteem, that barely ever happens because if they have high self-esteem, they're usually very okay with their sexuality. So barely ever seen a high self-esteem, low sex drive girl. Usually you can tickle the sex drive out of her and you have a good time. And another thing that they do is like they're very sexually open, like I just said. There's no shaming, no slut shaming. They love sex. They're totally cool with that. They're very empowered. They are very feminist, if you will. Now, feminism is a term that has been coined very badly, but a true feminist is like, yeah, I fucking love sex. I'm going to go fuck some stud tonight. That's pretty cool. And they're not judging. So that is the actual true essence of true feminism. And the high self-esteem, high sex drive girls, welcome to heaven, my friend. So those are girls that are amazing. They have high sex drive. Keep this girl in your life. Have sex with her. Have fuck buddy relationships, one-night stands. Get a long-term relationship. Make her your queen, okay? Make her the one main girl next to the other girls. Keep that woman in your life. Celebrate her and grow alongside with her. Many people would even go as far as to say, okay, the pickup journey is going through all the bullshit in order to find high self-esteem, high sex drive girls. Now, those girls are rarer, but the more you're going to expose yourself in terms of pickup to all these girls, the more you find them. They're out there. The older you become, the easier it will be for you to find them, and the easier it will be for you to attract them. There's a lot of them out there, and they're just absolutely amazing. And one last point here. We talked a lot now. This video has been quite long, but it's important for you to know, thus the longness of the video. Many times it comes out whether or not she's low self-esteem or high self-esteem the longer you hang out with her. So don't go to the club and be like, low self-esteem, high self-esteem, low self-esteem, high self-esteem. You probably are not going to be that accurate when you do it that fast. But in general, once you see a bunch of those traits while engaging with a girl for a longer period, when you've had sex with her a bunch of times, know your worth, know what's going on, whether or not she's low self-esteem or high self-esteem. Again, it comes with time. Her true self comes out with time. I had one of my ex-girlfriends was extremely high self-esteem, as I thought, extremely smart girl, extremely beautiful girl. She was very on point. She was very testy, similar to the girl in the infield footage here. And she was very confrontational in a cool way, very witty, very successful. And I thought she was a high self-esteem girl. She was just naggy, but later on, the more I engaged with her, she actually showed huge traces of low self-esteem, and she was just like very, very fucked up. And yeah, so you can actually just tell with time. Don't freak out too much. Don't judge too early. The basic premise of this video is if you see one or more of those low self-esteem behaviors, be aware and be sure to cut them out before they get into your life too far. If you see a high self-esteem behavior, one or more, be sure to spend more time with the girl. Be sure to keep her in your life if you want to, if you feel like that, and engage with them further beyond the one-night stand and beyond the fuckboy relationship if you want to. Those are the kind of girls. As a disclaimer again, don't judge girls, don't judge women. If they're low self-esteem, if they're manipulative, it's because something happened in their childhood. There's a discrepancy, disassociation with the sexuality. The same things that I discussed here is exactly the same with men. Men are obviously manipulating as well if they're low self-esteem, but we're not talking about picking up men here, thus I kind of left that out. But know your shit, guy. Have a good time, and let's go to the next chapter.